Are you considering homeschooling your children? Well, in this video, my husband and I are going to share with you the reasons why we decided to homeschool our kids. The first factor that really pushed us to homeschool our children was our home life. Both of us were working full time and we had long commutes. And so we would see our kids briefly in the morning to get them out the door, get them to school, and then we would go all day and not see them until later that evening. By the time we got them home, it was basically going through the routines of getting them fed, getting them bathed, doing homework, and then we have to go and get them ready for the next day. And so we didn't really have a quality lifestyle or that was conducive to raising kids and watching them learn and grow.
You know, my wife, she mentioned raising kids, and the effective way to raise children is that a parent has to have influence on that children's life. And the only way you can have influence on anyone's life is through time spent. And so, as my wife pointed out earlier, our life, the way it was before, we both were working. We had a dual income in the house. We would have what you would call the American dream. But something was being lost where our day would start at 5:30 in the morning, getting them up, getting them on the bus, getting them to the daycare centers. My wife had an hour and a half commute there and back from her school. And then half the time I was traveling. I was always on the road and traveling with my job. So even when I was home, it was still the same routine. So imagine starting your day at 5:30, which by probably 6:15, you hand your children off to someone else. You don't see them again till 6 in the afternoon, and we don't get home till about 7:30, and then you're supposed to jam in an hour of homework, a fast meal in the oven, baths, and bed, and they got to be in bed at least by 9:30 because you got to get right back up at 5:30. That is really very difficult to have that time spent, that fellowship with your children when they're going to be influenced by the people they spend the most time with. And based on the way our life was before, it was with the daycare and the public school system that they were in.
So we didn't really know our children. Like
Yes.
we wanted to know them as people
Yes.
and not a task or a chore on a list to complete.
Yes, and I would add that my wife said, knowing our children, we didn't realize that was happening. You really don't know what you don't know. We didn't realize we didn't really know our children until after maybe a year of homeschooling when it was with us all the time. And we went, wow, we really didn't know some things about our kids.
The second factor that really pushed us to homeschool our kids was public school. We became really frustrated and felt that we were kind of shut out of our kids' day-to-day learning and their academic progress with public school. Everything is okay if you're getting good reports and you're seeing decent grades and whatnot, but really the problems that we experienced with public school started to really emerge when our children had struggles, whether it was socially or academically. Because let's say, for example, academically speaking, for example,
Our second oldest.
Yeah, our second oldest child, she had some struggles with math, for example. And I, being a teacher, would often give her work and assignments even if she didn't have homework given from school. But when she started to have struggles with math, I wanted to talk to the teacher. How is the subject being taught? What is she learning? What are her work samples looking like? And I was able to get some feedback, but I wasn't able to get enough feedback that I could be satisfied that I was helping to fill in those gaps. And they were pulling her out and whatnot, but she was falling, further behind.
The thing that concerned us about the schools they were in at the time was they seemed to be, had a struggle in giving us that information. And then the worst part about that, which we suspected they just didn't want to. Because what we've seen happen in just our school culture is that there is more of this movement to push the parents out, the parental involvement out. And so the schools are pretty much doing all the work. And as a result, your child could be falling behind and whatnot. And one of the things we were concerned about was based on the feedback we was getting on our second oldest in her math class, it seemed to us that they were going to be willing to let her pass on to the third grade without having really done better and understand this concept. And once that cycle starts, then it's very hard to undo as time goes on.
Yeah, and so that was just an example of academics. Now, some of you might would say, well, that may have been just that school or that particular teacher, but we've moved around a lot because of my husband's job, and we found consistently that we were having issues. So, yes, one year you may have a good teacher or a teacher that you were able to communicate well with, and they were thorough in giving you feedback, but then another year you had a different teacher with a different level of communication, and that's just one example. Then there's the social aspect. So I have some strong-willed children, and what I did find is that, let's say a teacher struggled with classroom management or whatnot. Sometimes I felt like my child was being labeled, or I felt that the whole story, that the teacher would send home a report of my child's behavior without giving me a full picture of what was going on. And I find out later that my child is not necessarily the perpetrator of certain things. They are actually defending themselves because the teacher is failing to or whatnot. So we found ourselves consistently frustrated with just a lot of things. And then as a public school teacher myself, I saw behind the scenes. I was in the school and I saw some of the low expectations that some teachers had. I saw some of the things that confirmed for me that that faculty or administration wanted parents locked out of a child's learning process. For example, there was a student, I was in a meeting, and this student was about to graduate, had one more year, and wanted to take physics. And the administrators were like, oh, you shouldn't take physics. You should take something easy so that you can graduate, especially since you're not majoring in science. And she wanted to know about her parents' input because her parents were not a part of that meeting. And they were like, oh, you don't have to worry about that. You'll be 18 at this point, and we don't even have to include your parents, and you don't have to disclose to them what's being discussed in this meeting if you choose not to. So that really confirmed for me, they don't want, some of these schools really do not want parents to be involved with their students' learning. So consistently across the board, we just saw a lot of things that we were frustrated with as parents, and we wanted to have more involvement.
I think another factor, as my wife, she's transitioned into this in this conversation, is we wanted to raise our children with a biblical worldview. And that's very difficult to do that in a school system that is more secularized. They have more of a secularized view of life. And remember I said earlier that whoever spends the most time with your children will have the greatest influence on your children. So if we're working and the hours that are left in the day, we only get 1.5 hours of quality time with them, maybe 2 hours. And that's mostly spent trying to get caught up on homework and meals and stuff like that. And not that sitting down, fellowshipping, all those types of things that parents need to be doing. It's very difficult to expect that they're going to walk away in life with a biblical worldview that we may have when they spend all their time in a secularized type of environment. So people have often asked me, they said whenever they found that we were homeschooling, they would say, oh, well, they would assume, and they would make this statement, oh, we assume that you're a homeschooler because, we can understand the school system is not doing well in academics and there are problems there. And I would always say to them, well, if it's just about academics, then I don't need to pull my children out of the school system. But it's both. It's both academics, and it's also that I want to create an environment around our children where we can teach them God's word and teach them what does that mean as they look into this world. And that's very important. So when they go out into the world, because they're going to go out into a secularized world, then we want them to be consistent with their upbringing. that they take a biblical worldview out into the world with the educational academic tools that they have also been taught that's essential for them to live.
So, that was probably the catalyst that,
Yes.
or the straw that broke the camel's back for
Yes.
me. The schools that I was in, or that I taught at, were good schools, but there was a lot of immorality
Yes.
in the schools, and just the things that I saw go on, and the administrators were okay with. I did not want my kids exposed to that, and I didn't want them to think that certain things were okay.
Yes.
And I wanted them to, again, look at things in light of a biblical worldview. And one of the things that really discouraged me is that there were a lot of students that I taught and that were in the schools that they were curious about my faith. They wanted to know about Jesus. I've even had them say, we know that a lot of teachers are Christians. Why can't they talk about Jesus and whatnot? And to have students who are in need of God's transformation and to not be able to talk about it, not to be able to share that with them because of public school policies and whatnot, I just did not want that for my children. Mm-hmm. And so I was at a place where I was discouraged and hopeless, and I didn't know much about homeschooling. I just had negative connotations because it wasn't public school, and I was conditioned to think one way. Mm-hmm. But when I became desperate for a solution, God brought us into contact with a homeschooling family that attended the church that we went to, and they shared with us. They invited us to their home, and they shared with us their homeschool journey, their experience, and whatnot. And that was a deal breaker for me because I was like, maybe I can. Maybe there's something to this homeschool thing, and maybe we can do it. And one of the things that so encouraged me and gave me hope was not just what they were doing with their kids, but also they provided with literature, some books and whatnot, and a documentary that really articulated some of our frustrations. And the documentary was called Indoctrination. And so in Indoctrination, it talked about the history of the public school system, mm-hmm. how it came to be, what the true purpose of the public school system mm-hmm. is and was. And it just opened our eyes. And when we both saw that video, that documentary, that sold us, right?
It did. It sealed the deal when we saw it. We didn't just arrive at doing this in one day. This happened over a sequence of years of things that have happened because we have 4 children, and our 2 oldest were the ones that were in the public school system. And my wife, us being a parent, but she actually being a school teacher, being inside that system. But when we finally got to this place, it boiled down to, number one, understanding the history of the public school system. Then you really now understand why the school system is the way it is now today. So the academics is a problem, but you understand that how the academics work. The second piece was the public school system. It promotes secularizing your children. The Bible does not recommend that we admonish our children in the ways of the Lord. It commands that it's the parent's responsibility to raise the child up in the ways of the Lord. So that what that means is that there must be discipleship. That means the Bible must be taught every day. When you sleep with them, when you walk with them, when you spend time with them, that's a part of their education and their growth. And we came to the conclusion that it was not going to be possible for us to achieve both goals, right academic education and right biblical teaching that would make a whole child when they leave. So when we saw this video and we saw that really sealed the deal, but even then, we did not start homeschooling the next day because we were starting a new year where we had a whole school year in front of us, 2 semesters in front of us, and my wife was still teaching high school science at the same time. So we prayed about it, it wasn't just a matter of getting instructions from God that says you're going to do it, because we did, but we prayed about how he wanted us to do it. And the way God led us was he led us where our children and my wife would stay in the school system for 1 more year. And in that year, he would prepare us with the resources that we needed, because you need resources, you need curriculum. we needed finance. We had a year, and then after the year was over, we made the move, and we pulled them out.
And we haven't looked back.
And we haven't looked back.
So hopefully you've enjoyed hearing our why as to why we decided to homeschool. Knowing your why is so important because it's going to get rough. It'll be challenging. Some days you'll feel like homeschooling, other days you won't. There will be times that you will get discouraged and you will come back to why you're doing this. You will reevaluate that. And so you really need to, as a first step, know why you have committed to homeschool. Yes. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Please click like and subscribe to watch future videos, and leave down in the comments, why are you deciding or why are you considering homeschooling your children?